I have been a career coach now for roughly 30 years. I started working in universities when I graduated from University of Chicago and with my master's, and I started working there and with undergrads and graduate students, and then moved out here. And so I've been working with individuals of all ages for all this time, and I will say that I was a lost 20-something, and that's actually how I got into this business, because I really knew how difficult it was to be confused and uncomfortable and not really knowing my direction. And so once I did my master's degree, which was in mentoring programs to understand pathways, that's what I've really been dedicated to. So I love working with people who are in this time of life just getting started, or I know there's so many graduates out there who are hitting on hard times no matter what time of life they're in. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Daisy. Kate?
Hey, Bruins. My name's Kate Pletcher, and I run a recruiting firm called Treehouse Partners. I started my firm about 10 years ago, kind of at the tail end of the last recession, and have seen, good times and bad throughout those 10 years. Certainly have spent that time working to help companies identify great talent and bring them on board and give them some advice on retention as well. But also very involved with the UCLA. I'm a graduate of the Anderson School. That's where I got my MBA. And actually, as of today, it's July 1st, I'm the president of the Alumni Association for Anderson. So yeah, have taught classes at the undergrad and Anderson School as well. So love to help our fellow Bruins in any way I can, and very excited to provide my 2 cents today.
Perfect, thank you. So for our first question, as recruiters, career development coaches, what advice do you have for our audience members whose career journeys have been affected by COVID-19?
Well, shall I start that off?
Sure.
Stay calm. That's the first thing. I also teach mindfulness, and I teach that to the MBAs at UCLA as well. So I'm also very dialed into that mindset, but I know it's not easy for any of us these days because there's so much uncertainty. That said, what you can do is, think about, yes, how you can pivot. I'll actually give you a story. One of my clients that I was working with, she was a senior at another, top tier university, and she had been planning on going into the music industry. And that was what she actually really wanted to be, a composer, and had been doing internships along those lines. But her parents had already said, we want her to have a backup plan. And she knew that data, of course, data is a big direction for people. There's so many opportunities in that field. And so she said, I might someday want to go in that direction. Well, here we are. She started in that direction big time. And so we started changing her path. In April, she started planning which classes she was taking. We did a lot of research together to find a program, and then ultimately she's now applying to master's degree programs in data. So I know there are plenty of the folks out there who might have already applied for MBA programs. The GMATs have been canceled in a lot of cases, and some of my other clients have gone in that direction as well. So nobody's going to blame you for stepping out and saying, I'm hopping into graduate school right now. But there are a lot of just-in-time education options to gear up on those skills. And we know that those more technical skills are certainly in high demand, but we'll hear hopefully more about that from Kate. But those data skills, whether you're in social media, marketing, or content production of any sort, I think you need those skills. So unfortunately, a lot of people graduate from school and don't have those skills. So there are a lot of online options for learning those skills. Personally, I know that everybody threw the book at me when I was younger and said, oh, computers do everything, a long time ago. And that just wasn't me. And I was an English major and I was interested in teaching. And, that's not for everybody. And I know that. And so that means, really knowing what your skill set is. And maybe right now there isn't a place for you to use that. And again, it could be that now is a time to get kind of scrappy and figure out new options that you can create for yourself. And even if it's cobbling together a couple of different positions that don't look very career oriented, I don't think anybody's going to hold it against anyone. Similar to when we had 9/11, a lot of people had a rough launch. And, they did their summer, they took their summer off, and then September happened. And so, people moved on, things happened. So this is not a forever thing. That's a summary, I think.
That's great, thank you. And I see that we have been joined by Sahil. So Sahil, please take a moment to introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your career journey.
Sure. Thanks again. Apologies, everyone, for being late. I was driving down from San Francisco and hit a bit more traffic than I expected, but happy to be here. So my name's Sahil, graduated from the class of 2013, an undergrad, and have been working in entertainment for a couple of years now. Left consulting right after undergrad, and then went to Discovery Channel, and I'm now at Netflix in the marketing strategy team. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And our current question is, as someone that is, a career development professional, you've worked in recruiting, you've worked with, other professionals. What advice do you have for our audience members whose career journeys have been affected by COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as Daisy mentioned, there's been a number of terrible incidents since 9/11, since the, the financial crisis and all types of things that tend to happen every couple of years. And I think step one is to not be too hard on yourself and know that everyone in your network, everyone that you interview for, those around you, they empathize with you and they understand the situation that you're in. And if you take a long-term view of your career over the next, hopefully 4 to 5 decades, this will be just a small blip to your start to a great career. Secondarily, I think, is to, as much as you can emotionally, not get complacent. So there's a ton of things that you could be doing that I'm sure we'll talk about on this call to still move your career forward, or if you have aspirations in higher education. Those are still things that are available to you today, and I'm happy to get into some detail on what I think about that. But I think, just the fact that we have the internet, there's so much online research you could be doing, whatever industry you're in, from healthcare to media to even finance and marketing. So many fields are changing left and right because of the coronavirus. And I think there's a lot of interesting analysis and trends out there that would be good to get smart on, so that when you have conversations with employers and hopefully things normalize soon and you're in the interview room, people are going to ask you, how did you respond during this crisis? What do you think about it? How do you think it's going to impact your career and our industry? So it'll be really good for you to be well-versed in those areas, but happy to go in more detail later on in the call.
Thank you so much. And Kate?
Yeah, I think I'd build on both what Sahil and Daisy said with maybe some additional thoughts. So I think, we're in a time that is very strange, obviously, but it's affecting people and industries and regions very differently. So while there are certain businesses and industries that have been completely shut down, and we might be questioning the fate of those companies and wondering how they're going to recover, there's other businesses that are booming, in this time, and have never seen more growth and didn't expect it and need talent in a big way. From entry level, roles, like I was interviewing actually someone from Albertsons, a month or so ago, and he was tasked with hiring 38,000 people. in the coming 2 weeks. He needed to find 38,000 additional people, right? So there are certainly jobs now. You know, our Bruin graduates may not be looking for a career, you know, in the stockroom at their local grocery store, but you know, I certainly think there are things that can keep you busy, right, and can keep the lights on. So don't be afraid or ashamed or embarrassed to take a job that isn't your dream career, while you figure out, you know, while we kind of let the smoke clear a little bit here. And again, no one would have a problem with that. And especially if, let's say, you literally took like a stockroom job or something and you spent your nights and weekends, you know, learning how to code from General Assembly, or as Sahil said, you know, spending time getting up to speed on the industry you really want to target, so that when the interviews start happening and those jobs start opening, you're the one. And so I think keep that in mind. I also think even in the professional sector, you know, we have clients that are essential retailers. We have clients in aerospace, well, not aerospace and defense, but that's the category. The defense side of aerospace and defense is very busy right now. Whenever there's turmoil in the world, defense does just fine. So maybe look at that category. Essential manufacturers in other categories, you know, CPG, think about the things you are buying more than you used to because of the virus. Toilet paper, etc. Technology, Netflix, Sahil, you guys are so busy, right? Your brains are exploding. The clients that we have that are so busy are all hiring. And so you may just need to pivot a little bit, take your skills, take your major, take whatever function you were going for, and look at an industry or a company or a series of companies that actually makes a lot of sense in a pandemic, which, you know, we're most likely to be dealing with in one way or another for another 6 to 12 months. So that would be kind of my high level. I do second Daisy's comment so strong about being calm, particularly at your age. And I know we have alumni and, you know, students and recent grads, but you're all probably pretty young. Just taking a bet. People get so hung up at your age on like, oh my God, that first job, it's gonna, you know, be the thing that I am doing for the next. No, you know what? I can tell you, 100%, 15 years from now, that first job isn't really going to matter. Sorry. And if your parents are listening, sorry, parents, you're wrong. Like, they're going to be fine. Okay. So just go get something, do something. The one thing that you cannot do is sit on your butt, because we'll be asking what you did with your time. And if you were like, well, you know, it was the pandemic, I couldn't get a good job. You know what? That lazy bum. You're out. So do something.
That's amazing advice. Thank you so much. That's all very true. Kate, we'll actually start with you on this next question, but what can our students and alumni do to make themselves stand out in a job applicant pool without an internship? There is a lot of, you know, very little jobs out there right now with huge amounts of applicants. So what can they do to stand out from the whole group?
Couple things. Even if you can't get a formal internship, try to find something. Again, you know, get off your butt. If there's a community organization, a church, a group you used to volunteer for, some sort of nonprofit, some sort of cousin or family business or distant family business, even if you can't get paid, do something and try to do it in the area you're.
We will jump back to her when her internet reconnects. Daisy, would you like to take a stab at the question?
Yeah, I completely agree with Kate. I know it can seem so difficult, and I am working with some clients who are recent grads and starting with, you know, assistant kinds of positions. While it doesn't seem like that's what you went to college for, you know, that's an important way to start. You have to start somewhere, and you know, as they say, paying the dues. So Actually, I also, through working with one of my newer grads, we found this site called acadium.com, which maybe you all already talk about that, which promotes apprenticeships. So for very small businesses. And in my research, I found a lot of, if you just Google apprenticeships, there's a lot out there. I actually incorporated a lot of information about apprenticeships in my master's thesis. Such an important way for people to get experience. So that can be a great place to look. So yes, getting some sort of experience. And this whole idea of standing out, honestly, I think it's really about having a very organized and clean resume. And maybe we'll get into more about resumes at a different time. I don't know. But so you can tell me if I can say something about that.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So there are a lot of, and I'll be curious to hear what Kate says and Sahil too. But there are a lot of very fancy formats now that are, from my perspective and the perspective of some recruiters I've talked to, they're just way over the top with, different columns and visuals, and it's like too much. So having just a really legible resume that's clear, that is skills based, that's a very important thing, to really think about what skills you brought in the work that you do and what results you had, presumably having some sort of experience, whether it's volunteer or not. Kate, I just jumped in when we lost you.
Thank you. Good tag team. I'm so sorry. I think you were probably talking about taking my baton on the start doing something. I have a niece who has started doing the social media for the official Harry Potter fan club, right? It's like 10 hours a week, but it's something she loves. She wants to go into social media. They needed someone for free. There are opportunities out there. So try to find something. The other major thing I would say is you have to go back to kind of the old school way of doing things, which means use your network. Unfortunately, the folks who've graduated in the last like 5 to 8 years, they came into an incredible job market where they were getting recruited and it was kind of easy, right? They didn't have to know someone at the company who could get someone to look at your resume. Those of us who have been on job searches in the past 20 to 40 years certainly know that it's kind of about your Rolodex, which of course is a word you don't know, but it's your link, right? It might be your family members might know someone. You have to find someone within the company. Don't just apply and hope that like you're going to get a call. Find someone within the company who's a friend of a friend, and try to get them to get your resume into the right hands. And even if there's not a particular job open at the companies you're interested in applying to, you can still network your way in and have informational conversations. Use the UCLA network, the Career Center, to find people who you can have conversations with, even if it's not with the specific goal of, I want to get this XYZ job, but rather, hey, can I buy you a coffee and have it postmated to you while we Zoom? So you can understand a bit more about what they do, how the company's faring in this time. And to Sahil's earlier point, especially if you've done your research and you have some interesting insights to share, you can follow up with, hey, I saw this cool article in the Wall Street Journal today that I thought might be interesting. I think you're going to start to be top of mind for these folks. So those would be my couple of points.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. Sahil?
Yeah, great stuff. So my kind of approach echoes a lot of what's already been said. I would put it into a 3-step process. So number one is doing research. So we talked about doing industry trends, really having a career hypothesis. So you might be sitting today thinking that you're interested in a particular career, or you either have an experience like an internship or a full-time job and you want to double down. That's great. But then doing that desktop research to figure out what are the key trends, where is this career path potentially going, how are the industries being impacted by COVID, having a really good understanding of that, and then trying to figure out for yourself, based on where I am today with my career, what is the logical next step in terms of a position that I could apply to? And a great place to start on this is LinkedIn, because for the first time in, who knows how long, you have access to everyone's resume, which is pretty incredible. So you can reverse engineer what they've done and kind of see what you should look forward to applying to. So that's the first step, is research. Secondarily would be getting in touch with people, and basically trying to figure out how you can grow your network. And what I call this is planting seeds. And the right way to think about it is you're just having, as Kate mentioned, just a quick chat over the phone about industry trends, trying to learn more about how their career is going and how they thought about it. And over time, if you have enough of these conversations, after a period of time, you'll start to see people reaching back out to you with opportunities that never even existed online. And that's the trick for me with standing out, is aside from my first job out of undergrad, I never had to rely on a resume to get a job, because people in my network knew my skill set. And that's when it's easiest to stand out. But of course, it takes some time in your career to get to that point. So I think the second point would be to network, and the UCLA One platform, as well as all the other resources you have available to you, are a great kind of place to start. And then thirdly, and just general advice that I think Daisy and Kate both mentioned in some flavor, during this time, kind of cast a wide net. So even better if your career hypothesis is super duper specific, but understand that there just might not be the supply of jobs out there today. And so you might have to look at, okay, what are some ways that I can get that skill set, but in a different capacity? And then trust me, over time, when you look back at that job, it'll be easier for you to connect the dots into your future role than trying to worry about getting that exact position that you think you need to progress. So it's doing research, talking to professionals, and then casting a wide net and keeping an open mind at this point.
Perfect, thank you. And Sahil, we'll actually start with you on this next question. So if students or alumni were offered an internship or job that was rescinded, should they still list it on their resume since they were qualified enough to land it in the first place?
It's a good question. I think more of a stylistic thing. Honestly, I don't think it's going to sway the decision either way. And my opinion is the point to mention that is when you reach out to a professional or you have a cover letter, mention it kind of in passing. But I think having just 2 lines on your resume with like a date that doesn't exist is not going to do much. It's just going to raise more questions. But I understand why people might feel otherwise. I think one thing that you should do, though, is stay in touch with that employer, because you've made it through the recruiting process. So any smart recruiter is going to want to stay in touch with you and reach back out when things normalize, and hopefully say, hey, we have this role open, or we have a different one. And I think the onus is on you, the intern offeree, to keep that relationship going. But you've done all the hard work of making it through the recruiting process. I think it would be a waste to throw it all away. So that's a relationship that you should keep a really close tab on. But yeah, curious if anyone else disagrees with my recommendation on the including it part.
Definitely not put it on the resume. That would be pretty weird. I think if it were like some sort of very, very, very prestigious internship or something, maybe you could mention it, but it's more like Sahil said, like, in a cover letter, or as you're kind of, making calls and networking and explaining why you're back on the market. It's a perfect time to mention it.
Perfect. Daisy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sorry, I was looking, there was a Q&A that came in, so I got distracted. No, I wouldn't put it on the resume. It could, depending on the position that you're going for. I do believe in cover letter writing, and I do believe it could potentially be something to touch on if it's really appropriate. If it's something that's closely aligned, perhaps. So that could potentially be worked in there. I don't know. What do you think, Kate, on that?
Yeah, I think you could go into the cover letter. Again, it's kind of like if it was a really sexy company, or, something where, like, let's say it was one of the top tier management consultancies, or a Google or Apple or something like that, you could mention it. If it's, miscellaneous company down the street, I don't think it helps you. So, but the cover letter would be the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so at this point, what we will do is actually we'll pivot from our prepared questions to our audience submitted questions. So our first question for all of our panelists is employers are reluctant to disclose their true pain points. What are some ways to find out what their true needs are so one can prepare potential solutions in anticipation of a first meeting? It's a great question. Kate, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, employers are stinkers like that, right? They know they're recruiting you, and if you're evaluating them as much as they're evaluating you. I think I'm going to go back to Sahil's earlier point about being up to speed on the industry and the latest things that are happening. That is the key. If you have been reading everything you can on the industry, and you have a Google alert set up for the company so you know everything that they're talking about, you're following their social media, even to the point of what they're liking, what they're commenting on, you're going to kind of know their actual pain points without them having to explicitly disclose it in the interview. I also think the timing of when you ask those deeper questions is important. Sometimes as recruiters, we have candidates who, before they'll even take an interview, they have 4 or 5 really hard-hitting questions about, what is their status on this? And we're kind of like, whoa, we obviously were reaching out about a cool opportunity we think you could be a fit for. Why don't we date a little bit before you ask us about that rash on our arm or something? Like, just get to know us a little bit. So I think you kind of have to go into it with a pretty optimistic view and really assuming that there is genuinely a really cool opportunity at the company, even if the company has some skeletons in the closet. And then before you get to the point where you're accepting an offer, you can kind of start asking the more hard-hitting questions. But if you've done your preliminary kind of research on the industry and the company, you'll probably have a pretty good sense for some of the pain points that they're dealing with.
Awesome. And Sahil or Daisy?
Sure. Yeah, I think +1 to everything that's been said, especially on the timing. I think you do get the right to ask the tough questions once you have the offer in hand. And I've actually gone so far as to ask to speak with other employees that were not part of my interview process to get their take. So just know that timing is everything with that. And when you're going through the interview process, you don't have full leverage, but once you have the offer and they really want you to sign, that's where you have the leverage. I would also say that it depends your definition on pain points. Is it like an industry pain points, a company pain points, or a thing to watch out for in the role? Those are all different flavors and they require different types of answers. Asking, what does success look like? What are some of the challenges that have happened? All those sorts of things are great. You're never going to really get the skeletons in the closet take until you join the company, which is just something you should keep your mind open to. But yeah, I think if I were to summarize, +1 to timing, and then also doing your own due diligence on, people who have either worked at the company before, who no longer work there. That can be a great source. Doing your homework on Glassdoor, seeing how the news talks about them, what's the publicity about the company if it's big enough. So those are some things. But honestly, I think if you're trying to get full transparency into everything before you sign, it's just not realistic. So just be prepared to have an open mind and figure it out as you move along. Yeah, Daisy, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I read that question, I think it was, to me, because I do like clients to be aware so you can have a conversation, not necessarily so you can even, I used to call it stump the host questions. I hated those when I was a recruiter for a while. They give you the hardest question. It's like, come on. So don't go there. But but I think it's good to know the whole competitive arena, of where this company is and what's going on in the industry in a more, general term. And one of the ways that I think I've seen my clients learn more is through talking with their friends and finding out, like maybe it's a smaller tech company or maybe it's a smaller product company even, check in with your friends, look on LinkedIn, see, pretty much what you're talking about, see who's been there, use the whole we've got so many resources to know what's going on with the company, many more than, 20 years ago, right? So use all of those to do your snooping around, and then you can, I think it's important to come in with ideas so that you're prepared to say, well, I'm curious about these things with the company, but not in any laser sharp kind of way, more in curiosity, having curiosity.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think we got some good clarification there in the Q&A. And so as it relates to pain points in terms of what are the things that the candidate is going to have to work on once he or she begins the job? I think it's a different question, but a good one. And I think it's just to simply ask, what are the projects that you foresee coming up? What are some of the interesting challenges that the team will face? Another good one that I love to ask is, what are a couple of projects that you did, last week or last month, or what's a typical day like? So really get a clear view on what is a typical day, the types of projects the team works on. And so those are all things that you definitely have the right to ask. And I would say, taking back my earlier statement, even earlier on in the interview process, before getting the offer, those type of questions around the scope of the role are perfectly fair game in the interview process.
Perfect. So another question from our participants today. So Sahil, you talked a little bit about LinkedIn earlier, but do you have any advice on cold emailing or cold messaging when it comes to LinkedIn? How do you let recruiters know that you're serious without coming off as overeager?
Sure, a couple of things. Yeah, well, on LinkedIn you can toggle your job seeker switch on, so definitely do that. And I think if you were to just Google search it, you can figure out how it's straightforward. In terms of in-mailing, which is a LinkedIn cold email feature, cold emailing for that matter, a couple of key principles. Number one, have a catchy subject line. And the way that I do that, especially with alumni, is just something simple like fellow advice or career advice for a fellow Bruin. Any type of commonality that you can establish with someone else is an easiest way to get them to open, especially in our Bruin community. With something else where you don't have a connection, just be straightforward. Say the name of the role, say the company, and most people will open. And in terms of the actual body, keep it very short. So maybe 4 to 5 sentences top. Do not go on rambling narratives about your life story. And just kind of say, hey, I'm a student at UCLA or alumni. I'm interested in X field. I saw this job position, but I wanted to learn more about the company and I came across your profile doing a search. Do you have time for a 15 or 20-minute chat sometime this week to quickly discuss? And I'd love to buy you coffee or something. That's it, 4 sentences. And I've seen pretty good success rate with that. I'll just end on this note because I do in-mailing a lot. Generally speaking, from the numbers that I've seen, for every 5 cold emails you send, you should expect to get 1 positive response back. So just a 1 to 5. And if you reach out to alumni or people that you know kind of in your network, that goes to 2 to every 5. So you kind of double it, but keep in mind the lesson here is majority of the time you're not going to get a response back, and don't be kind of discouraged by that. It's just the nature of what you're doing, which is cold reaching out to people. But yeah, I'll defer to Daisy or Kate if there's any other guidance.
I completely agree with what you just said. Absolutely. The wording is important. I mean, I have, had clients submit things to me that they've sent, and it needs to be personal without being too personal. So, and to the point, and it needs to make sense for somebody to open it up.
Yeah, I would also say if you can find, the UCLA thing is great. Another thing you can do is find a common connection. And if you are very polite in your ask to that common connection, it's a pretty easy ask to say, hey, Kate, I saw that you were connected to Daisy. I want to reach out to her. Is it okay if, I kind of drop your name, or would you mind making an introduction, or could I, anytime you can add layers of things to make it less cold and a little bit warmer, you're going to probably up that hit rate a bit. So, getting a note saying, hey, Daisy Swan told me, that I should reach out is much more interesting to me than, hey, can I get 15 minutes of your time for, no reason really.
But I want to add to that. I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, I saw you're connected with so-and-so. I am connected with so many people I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know how I'm connected to all these people. And usually I end up saying, I'm sorry, I don't actually know that person.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So what, and I know we're talking about using the alumni connection thing, but one thing I really encourage is to join a lot of groups on LinkedIn. You will be in a lot of conversation strands that you'll see, and in those groups you can post questions. You can say, hey, I'm getting started in this field, what recommendations would you have for me? I mean, I've actually done that when I was looking for grad school programs for myself. So I think that's one of the ways to really use that community. So there's so many groups that you can use, and that also um, automatically generates a second tier connection with all those people you're in groups with.
That's a really good point, Daisy. Thank you. And on that note, I just want to do a quick little plug here. There is actually the UCLA Alumni LinkedIn group, which would be really helpful to all of our participants today. We're constantly posting in there about events, resources, so definitely be sure to check that out. And now, time for another question from our Q&A feature. And I think all of you have mentioned this at some point in our conversation today, but taking classes. So how are classes taken on platforms such as General Assembly viewed by employers if you don't offer the certification because of the cost?
I want to hear from Kate.
Yeah.
Tell us, Kate.
I mean, I kind of answered in the thing just in case we didn't have time to get to it, but I'm a big fan if it's relevant, right? Like, it's funny because sometimes we are hiring for roles where like a yoga certification is actually quite interesting. But let's say you're applying for, a data analyst role and you got your, culinary culinary school coursework completed, like that's less interesting. But if you spent time, particularly during the pandemic, brushing up on earlier skills or going deeper on a skill set that you think would be pretty relevant for the roles you're going to be applying for, whether or not you got the certificate, I think it's very, very important to not only do those things, but include them on your resume. I think, the beauty of it, in addition to making your resume look good and maybe giving you some actual skills, is you're at the stage in your career where you think you know what you want to do, but taking a course and actually getting in and actually doing the work, you may find that you're not actually interested in it, right? So you're in this unique time where you get to test things out. The whole beauty of internships is not just to beef up your resume. It's also to see, like, do I want to go into HR or investment banking or whatever it might be. So the same applies for additional coursework. You want to feel out what these jobs and tasks and such would be like. And once you get into the job, if you don't like it, you're in the job now, and you're going to hate every single day, and there's no like light at the end of the tunnel unless you like quit and go get another job, which then makes you jumpy. So view those courses and that additional learning as also a time for you to really try to understand, is this for me?
I think that's such great advice. One of my clients who had actually been out of school and looking for work, also in the music industry, it was clear he needed to make a pivot. And so we really started looking into lots of options for courses. And he started using LinkedIn Learning, also known as lynda.com, and just to taste a lot of different social media classes. And what we found was he tried the digital media, he tried social, there's so many different areas to look into. And through tasting a lot of educational options, he actually found where he wanted to put his energy. And then we did a lot of research into a particular certification kind of program. And he, again, was able to take some of that instead of doing a certification. So all of that goes onto the resume, maybe not all of the little ones, but so those things are really important. Will you end up putting all of those classes on? Actually, you might. I've had clients who are actually seasoned professionals who made a big change. And in one case, it was literally from going from screenwriting to being a data scientist. And a lot of the courses that he was taking were Coursera courses, extension courses, and with all of the different levels that he would take, those would get added onto the resume. And then he did get a fellowship, but it was so much networking. So, you know, you may feel like you're at the starting point, but people are at starting points all throughout their careers. And so, yes, adding that new course information onto your resume, I think, is important.
Yeah, just a couple other thoughts. I have a bit of a different perspective, a little bit closer to Kate's in terms of courses being a great way to learn about your career interests. As someone who's filtered through resumes, I think what's important in education is applied education. So it's not enough just to take a bunch of courses, especially if they're not rigorous, like a boot camp or a hack reactor, which have brands in and of itself. But to think that, you know, just taking a bunch of courses will be a substitute for an internship or an applied experience, it's probably not the right way to look at it. I definitely agree with Daisy, like putting it on the resume is a great step forward to help brand yourself in a certain way. And when you talk to, you know, professionals when you're networking and saying that you're doing a course, it definitely helps paint a picture that you're interested in the topic. But, you know, if I were to think about your time as you're watching this webinar and how you divide it up, I would probably advise against sinking all of your time into just taking courses, thinking that that alone is going to get you a job. It's definitely a balance between learning stuff, applying it, having conversations, and doing everything that we talked about on this call. So just know that it's a fine balance. And from some of you that recently graduated, who spent the past, you know, 20 years of your life in academia, know that that application of the education is what's going to carry your career forward in the coming decades.
Agree.
Perfect. So we have another question from the chat. This one's a little bit more industry specific, but actually I think it's great. So I want to work in the healthcare industry as a physician's assistant. For graduate school, I need patient care experience and healthcare hours. With the crisis now, it is not possible to do this. Do you have suggestions on how to deal with this? And
well, yeah, I'll jump in. Actually, that's such a very tricky thing. And my first thought is to talk to the program and find out about requirements and what advice actually they would have, like what is acceptable. That's a very specific situation. And, you know, to find out what other options there are other than being in a hospital, because hospitals aren't going to allow that. Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I would probably go directly to your program and ask if they have advice. And I'm curious if you want to, you know, even follow up and say that you have or haven't done that. But Kate, do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, there's a lot of things that out there that are having to change their requirements. Even we talked about business schools. You know, you can't require the GMAT if people can't take the GMAT. Same with undergrads. The same thing is happening with all kinds of different certifications, for better or worse. You know, people aren't able to get their hours in for all different types of careers. So I'm guessing that some of the regulations and requirements are going to change a little bit, but you're going to have to ask the program. And if they say, well, we haven't gotten any word yet, you're going to have to figure it out, then I'd probably go back to my thought about how to get that experience. And it may be like an unpaid thing. It may be looking at nonprofits who might be more willing to take someone with less experience and get you some exposure to that, as opposed to what your intention was, you know, to work at like the most prestigious, you know, hospital in LA. You might have to kind of change that a little bit and just find a way.
Great. Sahil, any thoughts?
No, just echo that it's a tricky one. It seems like this is a specific requirement for your program. So finding out about that and how they're adapting that to COVID, I think is the most necessary step. And hopefully they're reasonable. If they're not, you can either think about it as, okay, I just need a little bit longer to get that requirement and it'll resolve itself over time. Perhaps more extreme way to deal with it is to find a location somewhere in the country that is open to having you and actually moving yourself there. And obviously I know that's no easy task mentally or physically to do, but if you're really hell-bent on getting that requirement done, it would show a hell of a lot of conviction to the program. But again, there's health risks, emotional stuff, and physical stuff to actually get yourself to do that. So that's not the first thing I would do. I would definitely take Daisy's advice and follow up with the program and see how they're adapting their requirements.
Great.
Move to Arizona. Get on over. Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Well, but actually there are, potentially other things. One of the jobs that's out there that's, I think, kind of interesting is the contact tracers. Contact tracing is actually quite a skilled kind of thing to do. So that could be kind of interesting.
It's all about adapting to the times, for sure. Our next question is about when it comes to applying for jobs. So how do employers view private portfolios, such as writing or artwork for creative positions, or even private LinkedIn accounts? Are you able to send that information selectively, or do you have to have it open to everyone when it comes to applying? If it's private, is that viewed negatively? And Kate?
I answered this in the chat too. Without knowing the context, it's kind of hard. So my initial thought is you can definitely keep it private, and if you're applying for creative roles, the company's going to ask you for it. But what my question was back to the asker was why? I don't see a reason to necessarily keep it private. The only reason I could think of is if you had a very broad portfolio that showed like all these different types of things, and you were applying for, say, packaging position or something very specific, like digital editing in animation, and you didn't want them to think like, oh, I've just kind of dabbled in a lot of things. You want them to think like, I am a deep dive, digital animation editor. You may want to customize it, but I think it'd be better to have it be public so that more and more people can discover you. And I would look at your portfolio, and instead of having it be broad and not a clear story, have that front landing page kind of put you into different buckets of expertise, and pick, maybe the top 4 or 6 that you want to be known for. And then, the potential employer will spend their time on, say, the digital animation, page within your portfolio. So without context, it's a little bit harder to tell, but I would side with going public, but I wouldn't view it as a negative if it was private.
Great. Any other thoughts from our other 2 panelists?
No, I think just to be mindful, to Kate's point, that the issue with private links is they require passwords or whatever, and recruiters often pass candidates back and forth, and you're going to have multiple people trying to access it. So it just creates an additional barrier to figure out who you are, and I'm usually not a fan of that. So I think there's very little downside to making it public. And in terms of actually designing a website or whatever, I know that can be a hassle for a lot of students. There are some resources that do cost money that are a very cost-effective way. One website I love for myself is peopleperhour.com. That's peopleperhour.com. There's a bunch of freelancers there that can design your personal site for, maybe $100 to $300. And I know that's quite an investment, but for someone who's a creative, I definitely think that a traditional resume is probably not going to do the trick. So you're going to need to have a sizzle reel, a portfolio, and all of that. And just know that it's all templatized, and there's a whole world in this kind of aspect of branding yourself. And so just know that there are professionals that can help you do this in a very quick way.
Great. All right, and one more question. So online applications often have applicants self-identify regarding ethnicity, gender, and disability. And although the disclaimers state that this information will not be used against the applicant and merely used to notify the government, do you have any insights as to this? It's a tricky question. Daisy? Or
Go ahead, Daisy. I was just going to say it's not a factor for us. We look at the name, the resume, and then until we interview you, we can't really make any decisions thereafter. So, and I think you'd find that answer at most employers. But Daisy and Kate, go ahead if you have any kind of reality tips from your extensive experience.
Are any of my clients listening right now? I don't know. Just totally speaking candidly, right? That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I would say for the most part, if I'm hearing anything, it's that we have a number of clients who are actively seeking people who can increase the diversity of their teams. So if you happen to be a part of an underrepresented minority or someone with a disability, I think it would actually help you. Not that if you don't answer it, they're going to assume you're like a white male. If you're uncomfortable at all, I'm totally fine with not answering it. But if for some reason you do fit one of those criteria, I think in general, and certainly in this climate right now, it would serve you to click the box. Companies are trying to figure out ways to do this. For a really great reason, right? Like they really genuinely want to increase diversity in their ranks and in their leadership in particular. And that's a hard thing to do, right? If they're just doing what they always did, right? So if you can kind of make it easier for them, I think they'd be interested in it. That's my candid answer.
Amazing. Daisy, do you have anything?
I just am always honesty is the best policy. That's my bottom line.
Great.
Yeah.
So we have time for one last question. I'm sorry, Daisy, did you want to add?
Well, I wanted to answer, somebody posted a question about remote and how you let people know you're looking for remote work. Basically, I always like to see a profile on a resume, and I started to talk about resume formats. I like a very simple, clear format, which starts with a profile on top, goes with more of a chronological, in general, a chronological resume, and with education at the bottom for people who have been out of school for 6 months or more. That's what I go with. In that profile section, if you're specifically looking for remote and you have remote experience, have a bullet about that. Currently working remotely, looking for, preferred, something like that. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, so sometimes when I'm looking at a resume, I don't really want to see what you want. I want to see what you can give me, right, as the employer. So my advice to the remote seeker is to apply for jobs that explicitly say remote is okay. Most jobs that are okay with fully remote explicitly say that. So look for that and apply. Because most companies, most roles are not fully remote. So they kind of call it out. So I guess I would kind of err on the side of not including it, because as soon as you include it, I'm like, oh, I wonder why. My question is like, why do they want to be remote? Do they like working in their pajamas? Do they have, other situations going on at their home that might distract them? I kind of start to ask questions where I'd rather just like, if I said remote's okay and you applied, we're good.
Yeah, I actually really back you up on that. I think that's what I was thinking about, because there are so many people who are looking for remote work now, and there is more remote work now. I was making a mental assumption in there. So yes, exactly. Otherwise, trying to negotiate to working remotely is another thing that you need to negotiate down the road. It's not something you come in, saying, I want to work remotely. Can you change this job for me? That's not how it works.
Perfect.
But I wanted to also mention, do I have a second?
Yes,
about resume formats, and I am curious to hear what Kate and Sahil say about this. There are a lot of these formats now that have 2 columns, that have different visual aspects to them, that are sort of graphic-y, designy. One, I think those can really get messed up in the resume sorting, languages. So I wouldn't go that direction. Things are going to get garbled. Stay away from italics, go with bold, go with all caps, that sort of thing. Keep it not too crammed into one page. If you have a lot of information, if you've been working for more than 10 years, it's okay to go to a second page. But your resume, if you've been working for 2 years, should not be on 2 pages. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I think everyone who's listening is probably a one-pager. And I don't like the fancy stuff. It's one thing if you're like doing a creative, but even there, creative or marketing, it's like, even there, send me to your portfolio to get a sense for your aesthetic. I'd rather have something that I can like clearly read and that can show up in I have like a resume software that like pulls it. And if you've got some weird thing going on, it's going to show up as jumble. The other thing is that I think you have to keep in mind your LinkedIn and your resume should line up. A lot of times they don't. And then we have questions and it's weird and we just move on to the next candidate. And then at the top, I really do like a little bit of an executive summary, a sentence or two, not saying I don't like objectives really. Like you kind of got that from my earlier thing. I don't like I'm a this and I'm seeking this. I'm a this. I'm a this and here's what I can bring to you. So executive summary to me is better than an objective. Sahil?
Nope, agreed. I think everyone should have a one-page resume unless you have your PhD done, in which case, separate conversation. My motto with resumes is keep the format as boring as possible, but the content as impactful as possible. It should be a page, no colors, no pictures of yourself. Even for the creatives, if you're a creative, definitely take the advice that we talked about having a separate website, a separate portal where you're not constrained by your resume and you can be as creative as you need to be on a website. But yeah, resumes, don't overthink the formatting, don't show off your word skills in formatting there. Just keep the content very impactful, and that'll be the best that you can do for yourself.
Perfect. So thank you to our amazing panelists for their helpful advice and insight. Before we conclude, I'd like to take a moment just to highlight a few resources that are available to you through the UCLA Alumni Association. So first off, and Sahil mentioned this earlier, did you know that UCLA has our own networking platform? Join UCLA One and network with Bruins, search and apply for jobs, and find a mentor. This can be such a helpful resource to you during your job search, and feel free to scan the QR code on your screen to take you to the website and join. If you are looking for some extra inspiration during these times, I know that we all are, be sure to tune in to the official podcast of UCLA Alumni, Bruin Success. Hear from alumni on their own career journeys and what success means to them. Scan the QR code to begin listening today. And finally, sign up for Bruin Edge. It is our bi-weekly newsletter that features curated internships and job postings, career advice, and upcoming events. Thank you once again to our panelists, and thank you everyone for joining us today, and go Bruins.